The hard thing about traumatic loss is that you're dealing with the trauma symptoms and the grief symptoms at the same time. Hey, I'm Dr. Harry McCleary, and I spend the majority of my week treating active duty service members with PTSD. In this video, I'm going to not only talk about traumatic loss, but also talk about how people often get stuck, and more importantly, how to get unstuck. When there is a loss, whether that loss is the loss of a loved one, loss of an opportunity, loss of ability, there is a very natural process and often a painful process that we all go through. You might be experiencing a roller coaster of emotions and thoughts, riddled with what ifs and if I had only. But what happens when someone struggles to feel those emotions or think about the loss? And dare I say, what happens when somebody refuses to think about and accept the loss, or refuses to feel those emotions? Similar to the loss of a loved one, or the loss of an opportunity or ability, there is a very natural and sometimes painful process that we go through after experiencing a trauma. So you might be experiencing nightmares, intrusive images or thoughts, blaming yourself, trouble sleeping. But what happens when we struggle with these symptoms? What happens when we refuse to think about the trauma? What happens when we refuse to feel the emotions associated with the trauma? Well, I'll tell you what happens in both situations, both with the grief and with the trauma symptoms. You don't recover from either. Avoiding the emotions and the thoughts that go along with a traumatic loss stall that natural recovery process. I can already see some of you guys saying this. Well, I'm not, really avoiding these thoughts and emotions on purpose. It's just too painful, and thus I don't want to look at it. I don't really see anything wrong with that. Seems actually pretty adaptive to me. I hear you. And it makes perfect sense that you don't want to experience that pain, that sadness, that anxiety, that fear. You don't want to think about those thoughts that you were to blame, that you somehow played a role in whatever happened. I get that. However, at the same time that you are avoiding those feelings and thoughts, those thoughts and feelings are still coming. And they end up getting prolonged and can last really a lifetime if they're never actually looked at and challenged. The problem with avoidance is not just that it just works in the short term, but the real problem is deeper than that. The problem with avoidance is that you end up telling yourself things that you never actually give yourself a chance to challenge. So you might be telling yourself, oh, well, crowds are dangerous. I'm never going in a crowd again. Makes perfect sense to me. No biggie. Okay, well, if you say those things and you never go into a crowd again, you never gave your mind a chance to actually challenge that thought. Because perhaps if you went in a crowd, it wouldn't kill you. It wouldn't cause you harm. But without that new information, without that chance to challenge that thought, you never have that evidence, and thus you keep that thought, and no more crowds for you. Well, if I don't think about it enough, I'll just forget about it. I'm gonna hit you with a hard truth right now, and that is, most likely, you'll never forget about it. And there are times as a therapist that I honestly wish that I could take that pain away and just take that memory away and wish it away that it never happened. But I don't have that capability. And neither do you. The reality actually is, the more you try to forget about it, the more you'll probably remember it. Because actively trying to forget something is just another way to say that you're actually thinking about it. The goal of PTSD or traumatic grief treatment is never to forget the memory. I know a lot of mental health professionals, and none of them are that good. So the goal is not to forget the memory, but to put the memory in its right place. To get to a place where the memory is no longer controlling your day-to-day, and you can actually get your choices back. What I mean by get your choices back is you get to make the choice on the things that you want to do and what you don't want to do, instead of what you feel like you can't do and what you feel like you can do. A common analogy that I use is a Beyonce analogy. And please, Beehive, do not come for me. I mean nothing by this. If you don't like Beyonce, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. However, if you like Beyonce, if you are a big fan, if you're part of the Beehive, and you feel like you can't go to her concert because there are too many people, you can't see everyone, there are going to be people behind you, it's going to be dark, you can't be in that environment, that is a choice that you're no longer making. That is saying that you can't go to a Beyonce concert. Now, if you don't like Beyonce and choose not to go to a Beyonce concert, fine, there's nothing wrong with that. However, when that choice gets taken away from you because you feel like you can't do something that you actually want to do, that's where PTSD and traumatic grief become a problem. So what do you do? Where do you start? I suggest that you start with treatment. You start with seeing someone who knows about and maybe even specializes in trauma or bereavement, and have them help you walk through this process, because this is not an easy process. Not many of my patients want to come see me, at least in the beginning. Hopefully they ease up on that as the weeks go by. But having a professional support you through this process is going to be extremely valuable as you start to approach the very things that you might be very actively not approaching. So there's a lot of people that watch my content that either are not in treatment right now, have never gone to treatment, but are considering going to treatment. And they're wondering, well, what do I do? Okay. If you feel like you're not ready for treatment right now, that's okay. I'm just glad that you're considering it. What I would suggest that you start with is start with the choices that you feel like are no longer yours. What do you feel like you can and can't do? What are those things that you want to be able to do? Because those are really the things that may help you navigate this process. It's not always the losses that we have or the difficulties that we have that drive us to go into treatment. But when we start thinking about what we have to gain, oh, well, maybe I'll be able to go to my son's basketball game and actually be able to sit in the stands and stay the whole game. That's a motivator right there. Telling somebody, oh, well, you just need to get over this, or, I'll go into treatment and, I'll just get better. Well, it's not really a good enough excuse, honestly, or a good enough reason to go to treatment. Treatment can suck. I mean, I'm just being honest here. I don't work in a field of rainbows and puppies. I work in a field where people tell me the worst thing that's ever happened to them. So being motivated to come into treatment is extremely important. And I say this because avoidance is literally part of the diagnosis of PTSD. That's how ingrained our mind is set to avoid things that are painful. At the same time, avoiding those things may end up causing us more pain. And that's why I don't want to happen for you guys. Another thing that you can do is start to talk about your loss with people that might have experienced the same loss or might have experienced something similar. Talking to other people and being able to express those difficult emotions that are associated with the loss, or being able to talk through some of those thoughts that are going on in your head. Maybe even finding out that other people have had some similar thoughts may be extremely helpful for you. The last thing that I want to talk about as far as getting yourself unstuck is thinking about honoring or learning from the loss. And what I mean by that is if you've lost a loved one, if you've lost a soldier, if you've lost a buddy, honoring them by talking about them, talking about how they were a good buddy, talking about how they could go through a can of dip in a day. Keeping their spirit alive may be very helpful and healing for you. And I say this not just to honor that individual, but also to help you in your own healing process. When you start to talk about an individual, you start to not only remember the loss of them, but the potential good times that you had. Those are important memories that you don't want to forget. And sometimes we think, oh, if I go into treatment, if I heal, I'll actually forget that person. Once again, that's probably not going to happen. You're not going to forget. Another thing that some people think, well, if I get better, then I'll lose the lesson that I learned. Also untrue. When you learn a lesson, you can then apply a lesson. Or when you think about a loved one, you can actually have happy memories about them. And that's what recovering from a traumatic loss really looks like. It's not forgetting about the loss. The loss is painful and it will always be painful. But also remembering the good times. And dare I say, the bad times that you might have had with that person too. Something to think about. If this video was helpful for you, please like it, subscribe to my page, and click the bell to be notified when I post new content. But more important than that, if this video was helpful for you, then that means it can probably be helpful for somebody else. So please share it with them. Because at the end of the day, that's what all these videos are about. One veteran trying to help another.